Nadav is, as I mentioned earlier, our Shaliach, our representative for Israel here, sponsored by UJA Federation. He's here in Westchester. He's a very busy man. He's driving all over this county, speaking at synagogues, speaking at day schools, speaking to youth groups. He comes to us, and I love the fact that this is perhaps the first time our Shaliach came to us from our Reform movement. Right? He is a product of our Reform movement in Israel, of that progressive Judaism in Israel. I know that he spent time in Australia as well, coming to teach in that community, and he's here with us. And it's a privilege to welcome you here, particularly on this Pride Shabbat, because I know it speaks to you personally, and to tell your story and to bring Israel a little closer to all of us. So thrilled to have you with us this Shabbat.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for having me and my husband here. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to be here. And Rabbi, you gave a wonderful introduction about what's going on in Israel. I'd like to actually tap on that and maybe go from here. Two amazing things happened in Israel this week. First, I don't know if you heard, but Israel attempt to land a spaceship, a spaceship on the moon. So Israel, it's a small country, right? I mean, you've got United States, Russia, China, and Israel. So we are number 4, right after China, and we tried. It was really good. The spaceship came really close, took a selfie, and fell apart. And I'm thinking about the guy that wrote that check. I'm like, why not why on that spaceship? Because it was all privately sponsored. But that was incredible, and that shows something about Israel. That Israel always tried to be one step ahead in terms of innovation and being progressive in a lot of ways, trying to be in advance of technology, but not only, also in many aspects on society. And another thing happened just a day before the spaceship tried to land on the moon, elections. And when you look at the elections, you'd see that, first of all, shocking news, the prime minister is still Benjamin Netanyahu. I know, everyone were it was shocking. But interestingly, you'd see that the ultra-Orthodox parties went up and became stronger, and there is almost a concerning absence of the Arab parties. So in Israel, there's if you're an Arab Israelis who live, Arab who lives in Israel, in the Green Line, can get to vote. That's almost 20% of the people. That's a lot of people. And they decided not to vote, and they're not being represented. On the other hand, the ultra-Orthodox community is being amplified, and it's being overrepresented. So in many ways, you see a country that maybe have a very strong root of Orthodox Judaism in a very traditional way, in the opposite way of being progressive and liberal. And maybe that also meets me and my personal story, the contracts, or maybe having Israel both liberal and advanced, but yet also conservative and Orthodox at the same time, and the way it affected me, and the way it affected my coming out. So I'm going to try to read my personal story to you. I'm going to read it. It's going to bring me back to my bar mitzvah, and I hope I'm going to do a better job than what I did in my bar mitzvah. But I think in many ways it represents that contrast, or that the fact that Israel contained two entities at the same time, being liberal and being sometimes conservative in many ways. When I was 18, a few weeks before I joined the army, I gathered my courage and came out to my parents. The fact that my brother came out just before I did, a year before I did, didn't make the situation easier for me or to my parents. I grew up in a conservative Mizrahi family in Jerusalem with 2 parents and an older brother and sister. At that time, in the early 2000s, there was no reference to any LGBT topics in that world. You hear about them on TV, maybe 40 minutes away in Tel Aviv, but they were never in my community. It wasn't easy for my parents to accept me and my brother. They were afraid that we would be rejected by the society. So naturally, they were worried. Israel nowadays is different. Is different than the Israel they grew up in. I joined the army, and I became a combat soldier, and later became an officer in a medical unit. Everyone around me knew about me and about my identity. My soldiers, my commanders, and there was never a problem. In fact, for years, the IDF officially accept LGBT soldiers. So much so, they have special support system for transgendered soldiers. When I was released from the army, my parents began to accept my brother and me more and more. My brother married his longtime partner, and I began a relationship as well. That was a good thing. Everyone knew about us. There was one person we needed to keep this all a secret from. That person was my grandfather. They told him that our partners were really just best friends and sometimes even roommates. Really? My grandfather at the time was 100, over now 100, an honest and a decent man, a man of faith who was Hashomer Shabbat. I was told that if he knew that my brother and I are gay, it may cause him a lot of grief and even hurt him. And when I asked, why can't I tell him? I was told because he's a religious person, and you're going to hurt him because he's religious. I wasn't prepared to take that responsibility upon myself to hurt an older person whom I deeply care for, especially my own grandfather. While I found myself in an environment that had accepted my sexual orientation, in the army, in the society, even in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, there are LGBT representatives. There was one area where I felt I had no place, and that area was religion. Judaism is supposed to be pure, and I got the message that there is no place for gays. This week, Parasha talks about leprosy and the connection between the disease and the sin. Back in the days, there were rabbis that advised to isolate lepers from the rest of the community until they were healed. That moment, I felt isolated from my Judaism. Even though I wasn't sick, I got the message that there was something wrong with me. Was I not pure enough to be part of my own religion? Was it okay to be a good soldier, a good citizen, but not a good Jew? As time went on, my grandfather became older and reached the age of 104. Good genes. One Saturday afternoon, I got a phone call from my father who asked me to come to the hospital because my grandfather asked me to. I immediately understood that my grandfather didn't have many days left with us. My father also told me that my grandfather wanted my boyfriend to come along. And in those situations, you don't think. I mean, you do whatever it is and you rushed. So I didn't think and I didn't ask many questions and I rushed over. And when I arrived, everyone was gathering around my grandfather's hospital bed. He was just as sharp and clear-headed as always. At one moment, he asked me to approach him very, very close and come beside his bed. He put his hand on my head and gave me a blessing. Afterwards, he asked my boyfriend to come close and whisper to him softly so I could hear, "Promise you will always watch out for Nadav." Afterwards, he put his hands on both of our heads and blessed us together. At that moment, I realized that my grandfather knew the truth all along. And before he left us, it was important for him to give me my religion back. Something within me that moment became complete. And I realized that I don't have to compromise or surrender to any part of my identity. I could be Jewish and I could be gay, and I have my grandfather blessing, and it's okay. The combination between sexual orientation and religion doesn't need to be mutually exclusive. Today, in the state of Israel, the LGBT community has many rights. The Israeli Pride brings hundreds of thousands of visitors from all across the world. In the street, in the workplace, in the IDF, it's okay to be gay. Actually, it's irrelevant if you're gay or not in Israel. There are many positive steps that Israel has taken for gay rights. However, there are many aspects in the rabbinical institutions that needs to be improved. We can get married outside of Israel and be recognized as married civilly, but same-sex marriage is still not permitted in Israel. Options for surrogacy and adoption inside the country are yet to be permitted. However, Israel will acknowledge parenthood of surrogacy performed outside of the country. My husband and I decided to get married under a chuppah in Israel and legally in the United States. It was important for us that the special moment of our life will be in Israel and will be Jewish, that it will have a chuppah, that it will have Sheva Brachot. We believe that Israel should continue to change its approach to the LGBT community. So we join an Orthodox, egalitarian, LGBT-friendly community in Tel Aviv. There is one, and we join it. And the name of the place is Yachad. And this is a place that offers maybe Orthodox people to come together and not be excluded and not compromise on any part of their own selves. And we felt very comfortable there, and they accepted us, and we're grateful for Yachad, for the Yachad community. So if we look at the elections and we look at this story, we see that elections and what happened this weekend in Israel and my own personal story, I see the resemblance. Israel is diverse, is orthodox, and it's not accepting, and it's annoying, and it's discriminating, but it's liberal, and it's warm, and I feel at home, and you feel the same thing at the same time, all the time. And that's Israel. It's being so connected and so well perceived and accepted, yet being discriminated at the same time, feeling loved and feeling rejected at the same time. And that mixed up of a feeling, this is exactly what we Israelis feel, maybe also this week. So let me send you with this. Next time you're in Tel Aviv and you see two men holding hands and have talit on their side, say hi, because maybe it's alien me. Just say. זהו, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you.